The taste of betrayal is bitter, but revenge is a dish best served calculated. Ask Andrew Sterling, he knows this better than anyone. I never saw it coming. Standing in my corner office on the 40th floor of Manhattan's most prestigious address, I was living what many would call the American dream. Sterling and Associates, the law firm I built from scratch 15 years ago, had just closed another record-breaking quarter. My Patek Philippe watch caught the morning sun as I gazed at the skyline, mentally counting the buildings where our corporate clients resided. Life was perfect, or so I thought. The first red flag came in the form of a misplaced phone. My wife Sarah's iPhone, specifically, lighting up with a message while she was in the shower. I'd never been the type to snoop, but the preview notification made my blood run cold. Everything set for tomorrow. He doesn't suspect a thing. The sender? David Cohen, my managing partner and supposedly loyal friend of 12 years. I'd made my fortune by reading people, by catching the subtle tells that revealed their true intentions. How had I missed this? The signs had been there: Sarah's sudden interest in the firm's finances, her carefully casual questions about our corporate structure, the late-night yoga classes that left her glowing but not sweaty. "Honey, have you seen my phone?" Sarah's voice drifted from our master bathroom, sweet as honey and just as sticky. I could picture her wrapped in one of our monogrammed Egyptian cotton towels, her blonde hair dripping onto Italian marble tiles that cost more than most cars. "No, dear," I called back, already downloading the contents of her phone to my secure cloud drive. 15 years of practicing law had taught me one thing: evidence is everything. What I found turned my world upside down. Emails to divorce attorneys. Screenshots of our bank accounts. Photos of her and David in situations that made my stomach turn. But it was the draft petition for divorce that truly showed her hand. She wasn't just leaving me. She was planning to take everything. The old me would have confronted her immediately, let rage and hurt pride dictate my actions. But I hadn't become one of New York's top attorneys by acting on emotion. No, this required something more elegant. Over the next 3 months, I became the perfect husband. I worked shorter hours, bought her surprise gifts, even suggested we take that second honeymoon she'd been hinting about. All while my own carefully selected team of private investigators documented every meeting, every secret phone call, every rendezvous at the Plaza Hotel. Sarah thought she was so clever, using burner phones and private email accounts. She didn't realize that in the digital age, everything leaves a trace. Every questionable transaction she'd made, every document she'd forged, every attempt to hide assets, I had it all. But the real masterstroke came from understanding my opponent's psychology. Sarah married me for money and status. She stayed for the lifestyle. So that's exactly what I used against her. I began restructuring my assets, but not in the obvious ways she and her lawyers would be looking for. No, I did something far more sophisticated. I transferred controlling interest in Sterling and Associates to a series of trusts and shell companies, each layer more complex than the last. On paper, I appeared to be nothing more than a salaried employee of my own firm. Then came Phase 2. Anonymous tips to the IRS about certain irregularities in Sarah's personal accounts. Questions raised about the authenticity of signatures on various financial documents. A quiet word in the right ear about possible ethical violations by a certain managing partner. The day Sarah finally served me with divorce papers, I actually smiled. She thought it was the beginning of her victory. Instead, it was the start of her downfall. The look on her face when her high-priced divorce attorney realized there was nothing left to take was worth every penny I'd spent on preparations. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face as she learned that not only was I essentially judgment-proof, but she herself was under investigation for financial fraud. David didn't fare much better. An ethics committee investigation ended his legal career before it could even reach the criminal courts. Last I heard, he was selling real estate in New Jersey. But the real satisfaction came 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I was leaving my office when I saw her, sitting in the lobby of my building. Gone were the designer clothes and flawless makeup. She looked broken. "Andrew, please," she said, stepping into my path. "I've lost everything. My accounts are frozen, no one will hire me, I can't even rent an apartment because of the fraud investigation. I need help." I studied her face, the face I'd once loved, the face that had lied to me for months while plotting my destruction. And I felt nothing. "You know what the funny thing is, Sarah?" I said, straightening my tie. "You could have just asked for a divorce. I would have given you a generous settlement, wished you well, and moved on. But you got greedy. You wanted it all, and you didn't care who you hurt to get it." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears smearing what remained of her mascara. "I was stupid. I was wrong. Please." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "You were. And now you're facing the consequences of your choices. That's how the world works. That's what I do for a living, help people face the consequences of their choices." I stepped around her, then paused. "You should head home, Sarah. It's getting dark, and I hear the subway can be dangerous this time of night." The sound of her quiet sobs followed me out of the building, but they didn't move me. In the end, she'd taught me a valuable lesson: trust, like respect, must be earned. And once broken, some things can never be repaired. As my driver pulled up in the sleek black Mercedes, I caught my reflection in its tinted windows. I looked exactly the same as I had 6 months ago, when this all began. But I wasn't the same. I was stronger, wiser, and, perhaps, a little colder. The city lights blurred past as we headed uptown. I had a dinner reservation at Per Se, my usual table, the one Sarah and I used to share. Tonight, I'd dine alone, but I wasn't lonely. I'd learned to enjoy my own company, to savor the peace that comes with knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. Some might call it revenge. I prefer to think of it as justice, served cold, calculated, and complete. Looking back now, I realize that Sarah's betrayal, painful as it was, gave me something valuable: clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes from seeing through the illusions we build around ourselves and the people we love. It taught me that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted can lead you to everything you actually need. The story made the rounds in legal circles, of course. A cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and consequences. Some called me ruthless. Others, brilliant. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. These days, I still run my firm, more successful than ever. I've earned a reputation for handling complex corporate divorces, a specialty that never fails to make me smile. My rates are astronomical, but people pay them gladly. After all, who better to protect your assets than someone who's mastered the art of strategic defense? Sarah. I hear things now and then. She's working as a bartender in Queens, living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she ever thinks about what could have been, if she'd chosen differently. But then I remember the look in her eyes when she thought she had me cornered, and any trace of sympathy evaporates like morning dew under the harsh light of reality. David occasionally sends messages through mutual acquaintances, seeking to explain, to apologize, to rebuild bridges. I let his words float away unanswered. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. The world keeps turning. Life goes on. And I've learned that the best revenge isn't just about winning, it's about winning so completely that your opponents are left wondering if they ever really had a chance at all. As for love, well, that's a more complicated question. I date occasionally when I find someone intriguing enough to hold my attention. But I approach relationships differently now. Trust is earned slowly, verified constantly, and withdrawn at the first sign of deception. Some might call it paranoid. I call it prudent. The story of my revenge has become something of a legend in certain circles. A reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, and that underestimating your opponent is the surest path to defeat. But there's one detail that few people know, one final twist that gives me particular satisfaction: Sarah's phone, the one that started it all. I keep it in my office safe. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest moments of carelessness. And every now and then, when I'm working late and the city lights twinkle like stars below my office window, I think about that morning when everything changed. I think about the man I was then, comfortable in his illusions of perfect love and trust. And I raise a glass to him, that naive version of myself, because his destruction made way for something better: truth. The truth is, we're all capable of far more than we imagine, both good and bad. The trick is knowing which path to take when the moment of choice arrives. Sarah made her choice. I made mine. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. The sun is setting over Manhattan now, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. From my office, I can see the building where Sarah and David used to meet. It's been converted into luxury condos. I own the penthouse, though I never stay there. Some might call that petty. I call it poetic justice. Life has a way of coming full circle, of teaching us lessons we didn't know we needed to learn. Sarah taught me about betrayal, but more importantly, she taught me about strength, not the kind that comes from anger or hatred, but the cold, calculated strength that comes from seeing things as they truly are and acting accordingly. And so the story ends, or perhaps it's better to say it continues. After all, every ending is just another beginning in disguise. I'm still here, still standing, still winning. And somewhere out there, Sarah is still learning that actions have consequences, that karma isn't just a concept but a reality that comes dressed in designer suits and carries a platinum card. Some stories don't have happy endings in the traditional sense. But sometimes, just sometimes, they have exactly the ending they deserve. What most people don't understand about revenge is that it's not about the final blow, it's about the setup. Like a chess master, you have to think 10 moves ahead while making each individual move appear innocuous. My advantage was that I'd spent years watching Sarah, learning her patterns, her weaknesses, her desires. I just never thought I'd be using that knowledge against her. The week after I discovered her betrayal, I started keeping a journal. Not of my feelings, those I kept carefully contained, but of her routines. Every shopping trip, every lunch date, every suspicious phone call. I noted the names of her friends, especially the new ones who'd appeared in recent months. I tracked her spending patterns, her social media activity, her gym schedule. Knowledge, after all, is power. I also began cultivating certain relationships. The security guard who kept an eye on the Plaza Hotel's private entrance. The maitre d' at her favorite restaurants. The personal shopper at Bergdorf's who handled her account. Money talks, and in New York, it speaks volumes. But perhaps my masterstroke was in understanding the social dynamics at play. Sarah's entire identity was built around being Mrs. Sterling, the wealthy attorney's wife. Her friends were other lawyers' wives, her social standing dependent on her connection to me. So when rumors began circulating about financial troubles at Sterling and Associates, carefully planted, of course, her social circle started to shrink. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. I made sure she overheard conversations about prenuptial agreements that had failed to protect assets. I left articles about financial fraud investigations lying around. I spoke at length about a colleague whose wife's affair had cost her everything. Each seed of doubt I planted grew into a forest of paranoia. What Sarah never understood was that in the world of high-stakes litigation, reputation is everything. And while she was focusing on the tangible assets, the houses, the cars, the art collection, I was systematically dismantling something far more valuable: her credibility. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing, and each attempt to save herself only entangled her further in the web I'd woven. The beauty of it was that I never had to lie, I simply arranged for the truth to be discovered in the most damaging way possible. Looking back, I realized that my revenge wasn't just about punishing Sarah. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. For years, I played the role of the devoted husband, the successful attorney, the pillar of society. But that role had made me vulnerable. In destroying Sarah's plans, I'd also destroyed my own illusions about who I was and what I was capable of. The man I am now understands something fundamental about human nature: everyone wears masks. The trick isn't in seeing through them, it's in recognizing when to wear your own. Sarah thought she was the player, but she was just another piece on the board. A queen, perhaps, but in the end, even queens can fall to a well-executed strategy. These days, I find myself studying people more carefully. Not out of paranoia, but out of a newfound appreciation for the complexities of human motivation. Every client who sits across from me has a story, a reason for seeking my particular expertise. Some want protection, others revenge. I give them what they need, but I never forget that everyone, absolutely everyone, has the capacity for betrayal. The irony isn't lost on me that Sarah's attempt to destroy me ended up making me more successful than ever. My reputation for handling complex divorces has brought in a new class of clients, wealthy, paranoid, and willing to pay premium rates for someone who understands both the legal and psychological aspects of marital warfare. I've even started giving lectures at law schools about asset protection and strategic litigation. The students are always eager to hear about real-world applications of legal theory. I never mention Sarah by name, of course, but her story, our story, serves as a perfect case study in how seemingly impregnable fortunes can be protected through careful planning and flawless execution. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep eludes me, I wonder about the cost of it all. Not the financial cost, that was considerable but worth every penny. No, I wonder about the emotional price of becoming the person I needed to be to survive Sarah's betrayal. The old Andrew Sterling died the day he saw that text message. The man who replaced him is harder, colder, more calculating. But perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. After all, in nature, it's not the strongest that survive, but the most adaptable. Sarah's betrayal forced me to adapt, to evolve into someone capable of not just surviving but thriving in the aftermath of personal catastrophe. In that sense, I suppose I should thank her. But I won't. Some debts can never be repaid, and some lessons are best left unacknowledged. The city stretches out below my office window, a maze of lights and shadows, hopes and betrayals. Somewhere out there, Sarah is living with the consequences of her choices. Somewhere out there, David is trying to rebuild his shattered career. And here I sit, in my fortress of glass and steel, watching the world turn and knowing that I've become the architect of my own destiny. The sun will rise soon, bringing with it another day of challenges and opportunities. My calendar is full of meetings with clients who need my particular blend of legal expertise and strategic thinking. Each one brings their own story of betrayal, their own dreams of revenge. I listen, I plan, I execute. It's what I do best now. And if, late at night, I sometimes catch myself missing the man I used to be, the one who believed in love without verification, trust without evidence, I remind myself of a simple truth: that man was a fool, and fools don't survive in this world. They get devoured by predators like Sarah, consumed by their own naivety. The world is what it is. People are what they are. The trick isn't in changing either of these fundamental truths, it's in learning to navigate them successfully. Sarah taught me that, though not in the way she intended. And for that unintended lesson, I've given her an education of her own. Class dismissed. The aftermath of Sarah's downfall created ripples throughout New York's legal community that I hadn't anticipated. Other attorneys' wives began scrutinizing their prenuptial agreements. Partners at rival firms started questioning their own asset protection strategies. I became something of a cautionary tale, or rather, Sarah did. What fascinated me most was watching how quickly people adapted their narratives. Those who had been Sarah's closest friends now claimed they'd always suspected something was off about her. The society columnists who had once fawned over her charity work now wrote thinly veiled pieces about social climbing and fraud. The truth is, people love a fall from grace almost as much as they love a success story, and Sarah's descent provided both. The investigation into her financial dealings uncovered more than even I had expected. It turned out that Sarah's scheme with David wasn't their first attempt at manipulation. They'd been running a smaller-scale version of the same con for years, targeting wealthy men through dating apps and social events. Sarah would make the initial contact while David worked behind the scenes, gathering information and planning the extraction. I wasn't just another mark, I was meant to be their masterpiece, their final big score before retiring to some tropical paradise. The discovery of their previous victims added another layer to my satisfaction. Several came forward after Sarah's downfall, emboldened by her vulnerability. Each story followed a similar pattern: charm, seduction, betrayal. But none had fought back as systematically as I had. Most had simply accepted their losses and tried to move on. Their mistake was in treating it as a personal failure rather than what it really was, a tactical challenge requiring a strategic response. One unexpected consequence of the whole affair was the impact it had on my relationship with my younger sister, Rachel. She'd never liked Sarah, had warned me from the beginning that something felt off. I'd dismissed her concerns as typical sibling protectiveness. Now, years later, Rachel works as my firm's chief investigator, her natural skepticism and attention to detail proving invaluable in vetting potential clients and uncovering hidden assets. The firm itself has evolved. What began as a typical corporate law practice has become something more specialized. We still handle the usual mergers and acquisitions, of course, but our reputation for asset protection and strategic divorce has attracted a different caliber of client. People come to us not just for legal representation, but for comprehensive life protection. We don't just write prenuptial agreements, we design entire systems of financial security. Sarah's betrayal taught me that traditional legal protections are often insufficient. The law is a framework, but within that framework, there's room for endless variation and manipulation. Understanding this has changed how I approach every aspect of my practice. Each client's situation is unique, requiring a customized combination of legal, financial, and personal strategies. The psychological aspects of what I do have become increasingly important. I find myself studying behavioral economics and game theory in my spare time, applying principles of strategic thinking to legal problems. It's not enough to know what people want, you have to understand why they want it, how far they'll go to get it, and what they'll do when they realize they can't have it. Sarah's recent attempts to rebuild her life have been interesting to observe, though I do so only through the occasional updates from mutual acquaintances. She's tried to reinvent herself several times, as a lifestyle blogger, as a real estate agent, even briefly as a life coach. Each venture has failed, partly due to her tarnished reputation, but mostly because she's never understood the fundamental flaw in her approach to life: you can't build anything lasting on a foundation of deception. David, I hear, has fared slightly better, though that's a relative term. He managed to avoid criminal charges by cooperating with investigators, revealing the full extent of their scheme. He's working as a paralegal now, somewhere in the Midwest. A humbling fall for a man who once argued cases before the Supreme Court. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks it was worth it, trading his career, his reputation, and his future for a chance at a life he hadn't earned. The whole experience has left me with a peculiar kind of wisdom. I understand now that true power doesn't come from wealth or status or even intelligence, it comes from the ability to see reality clearly and act decisively. Sarah and David thought they were being clever, but they were really just following a script, playing roles they'd performed before. Their mistake was in assuming that I would follow my assigned role as the deceived husband, too proud or too shocked to fight back effectively. Instead, I rewrote the script entirely. I turned their weapons, patience, deception, manipulation, against them. But I did it legally, methodically, and most importantly, completely. That's the key to effective revenge, it must be thorough. A partial victory only creates future problems. These days, I find a certain peace in my solitude. My apartment, 48 floors above the city, has become a sanctuary of sorts. The walls are lined with first editions and rare art pieces, not Sarah's choices this time, but my own. The space reflects who I've become, refined, disciplined, self-contained. There's a clarity to living alone, a freedom in answering to no one but yourself. The dating scene holds little appeal, though there's no shortage of interested parties. Something about power and success attracts people, but I've learned to recognize the hunger in their eyes, the calculation behind their smiles. It's not that I don't believe in love anymore, I just understand now that it's not enough. Love without loyalty is like a house without a foundation, impressive perhaps, but ultimately unsustainable. Every morning, before heading to the office, I spend an hour in my home gym. Physical discipline helps maintain mental clarity. As I run on the treadmill, watching the sun rise over the city, I often think about the nature of justice. Not the kind dealt out in courtrooms, but the deeper kind, the natural balance that seems to exist in the universe. Sarah sought to destroy me, and in doing so, destroyed herself. David reached for something that wasn't his, and lost everything he'd legitimately earned. And me? I lost my illusions, but gained understanding. Lost a wife, but gained clarity. Lost trust, but gained wisdom. In the end, perhaps that's the most profound revenge of all, not just surviving betrayal, but emerging stronger, wiser, more capable than before. The city is waking up now, the early morning light painting the buildings in shades of pink and gold. Another day begins, bringing with it new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to be fought and won. I straighten my tie, check my reflection one last time, and head for the door. There's work to be done, justice to be served, lessons to be taught. After all, the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living better than anyone thought possible. Last week, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Sarah's mother, of all people. She wrote to tell me that Sarah had finally hit rock bottom, checking into rehab after a failed suicide attempt. She wasn't asking for money or help, she just thought I should know. The old me would have felt guilty, responsible somehow for Sarah's downward spiral. The new me understood that we are all architects of our own fate. I wrote back a brief, polite response, expressing appropriate concern and wishing Sarah a full recovery. It was the socially correct thing to do. Then I went back to work, focusing on a complex case involving international asset protection. Life moves forward, and so do I. Sometimes I think about writing a book about all of this. Not for fame or revenge, I've had enough of both, but as a guide for others who might find themselves in similar situations. A manual for surviving betrayal with your assets and dignity intact. I even have a title in mind, The Art of Strategic Justice, a survivor's guide to financial warfare. But for now, I'm content to let the story spread organically through whispered conversations in country club lounges and warning tales at bar association meetings. Sometimes the most powerful messages are the ones delivered in hushed tones, wrapped in the thrill of second-hand scandal. The truth is, revenge is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, perfect timing, and unwavering commitment. But justice, true justice, is something else entirely. It's the natural order reasserting itself, the universe balancing its books. My role was simply to ensure that balance was restored with compound interest. They say time heals all wounds. I disagree. Time doesn't heal, it reveals. It shows us who we really are, what we're capable of, and what truly matters. Sarah's betrayal didn't break me, it revealed me. And that revelation has made all the difference. As I stand here now, watching another Manhattan sunset paint the sky in shades of redemption, I realize that every story has multiple endings. For Sarah, it ended in a rehab facility. For David, in a small Midwest law office. For me. Well, my story continues, each day bringing new challenges, new victories, new opportunities to prove that the best defense isn't just a good offense, it's a perfect strategy. And that, perhaps, is the final lesson in all of this. In the game of life, it's not about who makes the first move, but who makes the last one count.